Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah. So hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm very sorry for the sound of the bells, but I'm talking from Italy, and that's a very Italian thing to hear, I suppose, at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. So my name is Filippo Lorenzin. I am the presenter of this panel discussion about digital art produced by Electric Artefacts. Today, we will talk about self-representation on social media through the works of the artist Fabiola Larios. Our goal today is that whatever your interest in digital culture is, that you will come away with something, a new idea, a fresh perspective that will make you question and think about digital media in a critical way. So here's the format, just to give you an idea of what to expect. I will kick off the conversation by asking questions that draw out some of the high-level themes regarding social media and the way they are designed to promote a certain approach to self-representation. And then, of course, we will give you an opportunity to ask specific questions that you have been thinking about. But before we dive into the discussion, I want to introduce my guest. So first of all, we have Fabiola Larios. She is an interdisciplinary Mexican artist focusing on the anthropology of social media and the representation of a self through selfies and avatars. Fabiola explores machine learning through the history of self-portraits and contemporary selfies, creating works that reflect on surveillance through the internet and censorship in social media. Her work has been presented at exhibitions and art festivals, including the Wrong New Digital Art Biennale 2017 and 2019, and the Iconic, which is the first Biennale of cryptocurrency. Her latest project is Internet Humans, a selfie of the internet, which is on display on the website of Electric Artefacts. Then we have Caroline Sinders. She is a machine learning design researcher and artist. For the past few years, she has been examining the intersections of technology's impact in society, interface design, artificial intelligence, abuse, and politics in digital conversational spaces. Caroline is the founder of Convocation Design Plus Research, an agency focusing on the intersections of machine learning, user research, designing for public good, and solving difficult communication problems. As a designer and researcher, she has worked with Amnesty International, Intel, IBM, Watson, the Wikimedia Foundation, and many others. Aleksandra Artamonovskaja is the co-founder of Electric Artefacts, an online venue bringing together curators, artists, and organizations dedicated to digital art to host exhibitions and connect with patrons. Aleksandra specializes in introducing digital solutions and new business models in the arts industry. She also leads cultural partnerships at .art, the digital address for the arts community, and was part of its core launch team back in 2016. As part of .art's development, she led a variety of digital initiatives, including Rhizome's 9th edition of 707.art, Art's participation at the inaugural Cutoff Online, and most recently oversaw the launch of Ars Electronica.art Global Gallery. We made it. I would like to ask Aleksandra to say something more about Electric Artefacts and the inaugural show you can find now on display on the website.
Thanks, Filippo, for introducing all of us, and thanks everyone for joining. As Filippo mentioned, Electric Artefacts is a new venue bringing together curators and artists dedicated to digital art. We believe that now in the age of digitization and more tech culture is infiltrating every part of our life. And so naturally, the progression of having an online space was the way forward for us. So what we do is we host digital art exhibitions, connecting artists and patrons, helping to resource an artist's continued exploration at the intersection of arts and technology. part of our mission is to educate a global audience about digital art, to promote digital art as the art of the 21st century, and to create a market for digital artists to pursue their career and have a go at actually commercially selling individual works of art. We do so by introducing new ways to learn and explore and interact with the art. And we continuously explore and innovate, and experiment and innovate in the field. And if you haven't so far, I recommend after the panel checking out the show and having the augmented reality experience that you can preview at home. So without further ado, I'm going to pass on the words back to Filippo.
Thank you, Aleksandra. So I will start with the first question. This is for Fabiola. Fabiola, your work, Internet Humans, a selfie of the internet, which is on display on the website of Electric Artefacts, is a series of portraits inspired by the use of popular filters to enhance the features of one's face or body. Can you tell us something about the creative process that led you to produce this project? In other words, what inspired you to make it?
Well, I was inspired by like this feeling we have that we want to preserve ourselves through an image, and how before we could have like cameras, people used to ask painters to paint them a portrait of them, or like of themselves, and then the painters will introduce them like they were painting themselves too, like in a mirror, or like, you know, like hiding somewhere in the painting. And I think it's like this idea of getting your features like being more beautiful, like even in the painting, you know that people didn't look like that, like they are like they look more beautiful than they were, like Caravaggio, or that he painted himself too, or like they used to be better in the paintings. And then how it started with photography, that it was like for everyone, for like everyone could have the opportunity of have an image of themselves too. But this was not a luxury anymore. So this was something that it was handy for everyone. So now it's handy like now for everyone, because everyone can have a picture of themselves, like, and it's a nice like a approved angle, like when you take a selfie of yourself. And then, well, that's the first inspiration that I had, like this feeling of wanted to be preserved. Sorry. And then I love the book of Kim Kardashian, like the idea of the selfish book, where she had like a bunch of selfies just printed and published like a book. Or Richard Prince with his Instagram selfies that he sold in an art fair. So I don't know, like the idea of working with a selfie and like is the image that represents yourself. I think it's super interesting, because then it's everywhere. Like you have it on your Facebook or any social media platform like Instagram or Snapchat or something. Like I don't know, I wanted to make this art piece with a lot of selfies, but I didn't have like it was a little bit tedious to ask my friends to them to send me their selfies. And then I started like researching like how I could get more selfies from people that I didn't even know. And then I found them by a hashtag on Instagram. And then, I don't know, like it was the idea of having a bunch of images to represent how it will look like a human from the internet. Like how is this feeling preserved of the digital image of one, like every person that takes a selfie and upload it on the internet.
Yeah, oh, thank you. That was very clear. Before asking the second question, I would just like to remind everyone, given that in the last few minutes we had quite a few new guests entering the conversation, that you are all very welcome to ask questions just using the chat, and then at the end of the event we will select, or we will ask all the questions you will send, basically. So now I will go with the second question. So Fabiola, you mentioned the body and the role of the body and the face quite a few times. And in fact, I think that the role played by your own body in your project is often very central. No matter if videos or images, the performative aspect is important and makes the viewer see your presence as a testament of genuine engagement. Basically, I, as a viewer, I see you, the artist, having a role in your own projects. You are not just someone asking actors to act, if you know what I mean. So to what degree do you think it is crucial for artists? I know this is quite a difficult question and very broad question, but I just want to make it very difficult for you. So to what degree do you think it is crucial for artists to show themselves online and develop their own brands? And also, what's the outcome of this dynamic? And regarding this question, given it's such a broad, it's such a broad problem, let's say, I would like to hear what you and Caroline think, just to see, whether you have two different points of view about this. I suppose we can start with Fabiola. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I think artists want to expose themselves, like their work, and if your work can be exposed on yourself, I think it's better, or like, because you get more attention. Like, even if you're a guy or a girl, well, maybe if you're a girl, you get more attention. But I'm sorry, I think it's easier to work with your own body, like with an idea you have, and then you have to work with your own body. It's you know what you want, and you know how you want it, and you know what kind of result you want, and it's easier to work with yourself. And people, like artists being their own brand, I think it's like when you dress up and then you pretend being someone else, and you're like playing. And I think it's kind of like that, like a game. I don't know. For me, it's what I think, and it's like the style when someone is painting, and then you see that they have this style in their paintings, and then it's like your style. It's different styles when people like to brand themselves and their own artwork. And I don't know, I think it's kind of like a technique or a style of to show your own work. Yeah,
that's great. Thank you. Caroline?
Yeah, I mean, I think social media can sort of function as this really great sort of conduit or reflection or a mirror in a way of one's own interest or selves. I know there are some artists who really kind of use it as a way to like create even like fake or false personas, which can be really fascinating and really interesting to sort of play with the idea of reality, since social media feels like an extension of our reality. As participants, we sometimes feel a deep ownership over our own social media, even though we don't necessarily own our data. We don't really own our profile, but we sort of built it. We add things to it. We kind of cultivate it, and that feels like a sense of ownership. And so there is work. I'm blanking on the woman's name, but she used Instagram. Filippo, I'm sure her name. She used Instagram and sort of crafted this fake personality. It was taking pictures of herself, sort of like an influencer, but she's like a contemporary artist. So I think social media is sort of an interesting sort of space, and in a sense of that, we can create false senses of authenticity. So am I myself, right? Anyone can be a dog on the internet, for example. Yes, someone just wrote to me, Amalia Ullman. That's who I was thinking of. And something about like Amalia Ullman's work felt so real in a way, if you look at it. Also because there's so many influencers who are having other people photograph them. So even the perception of like another person photographing the person, so not all images being selfies, but very clearly like sort of set up, like that is also, you know, like a material of social media. I guess for me, like I use my social media like a highly curatorial bulletin board in a way of like what I'm reading or what I'm engaging with. But there is like a level of privacy I add where I am thinking of what I'm sharing or how I'm sharing something. So for example, like my fiance is not on my public Instagram, but he's like, my whole private Instagram is just like photos of him pretty much. Or like the more casual use of Instagram. Whereas like my public Instagram is much more like, oh, here are like snippets of like research and like in progress projects, right? Things that I feel comfortable sharing on like a much more public stage. But, you know, I'm also a person that I think a lot about privacy and security and just also like a delineation between what are the different lives I have. So like I have my professional life, I have like an art life, and then I have like a human rights researcher life. And sometimes they intersect and sometimes they don't.
Yeah, no, I absolutely understand what you mean. And I think it's interesting you mentioned the work of Amalia Ullman. It's very interesting because I think whenever I talk about, you know, let's say social media art, let's say I started teaching these subjects maybe 7-8 years ago. And I found it very interesting the way the feedback from the youngest students changed across all these years. So for example, if back in 2013 or 14, I mentioned her work, I remember the students being quite shocked, you know, they were quite surprised by that project. But it's quite interesting because in the last couple of years, talking to students who were born maybe in 2002 or 2001, they were like, well, so what? So I think it's quite interesting to see how can I say, how liquid and ever-changing the situation is. So yeah, no, that's very great. I suppose I would go with the third question. So Caroline, an important aspect of both Fabiola's work and your research is how the marketing-driven interface of social media leads people to become users. Fabiola explores this in the work In the Virtual, which is a video where we can listen to the thoughts of the protagonist, who is her, while taking and sharing pictures on social media. In your own experience, what are the opportunities and the limits of making statements against digital media using digital tools? Do you think, I know this is quite a broad question, but let's see if we can find some kind of answer, but do you think, is it even possible to be effective in such a context?
I mean, I think so. Putting on my like research policy hat and taking off my art hat for a second. You need as many levers as possible to push on to cause change. So people saying like posting on Facebook about how bad Facebook is, while that is, one could argue, maybe a form of irony, it is actually effective. Like raising awareness is effective. Having complex conversations about the trade-offs using social media is effective. Having a journalist write about your work, about how it's critiquing social media is effective. Having investigative journalism, you know, uncover scandals like Cambridge Analytica is effective, right? All of these things are extremely effective. Signing a petition, you know, with the Mozilla Foundation around like data misuse is extremely effective. Like all of these things are effective because they're different levers that you are pushing simultaneously, and it takes all different kinds of change to push towards change. One thing I think a lot about is Hyphen Labs and I were the lead artists at the Tate Exchange on the theme, the Tate Monitor on the theme of power. And so we built this kind of like 2-week experience around like data privacy. And one thing we even asked was like, how effective is what we're doing? And we were very lucky to work with the Mozilla Foundation, because at the time I was a fellow at the Mozilla Foundation looking at AI, art, and labor. And the advocacy team pointed out that like you need all of these conversations at the same time. So having something like in the white cube space, for example, to explain to everyday museum goers of like, well, what is privacy? Like, what does data mean, is extremely effective as an advocacy tool. It's also effective as it spreads across many different themes and many different areas, right? One thing I've also just sort of noticed from my own, then putting on my research hat, is, you know, Twitter and Facebook, they don't really like being critiqued. Like, it's embarrassing, and they really, really dislike bad press. So like the more you talk about it, like the more bad press there is, it's extremely, you know, it's extremely important, right? Like it's important to sort of generate this.
Yeah. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. Yeah, and that's why I suppose, I mean, this is an ongoing issue, isn't it? I suppose this is something that artists who dealt with the problems of corporate media had to deal with since ever. I'm thinking about Dada, or I'm thinking about, you know, modern art, or I'm thinking about net art just a couple of decades ago. But I suppose that now the situation is become even more difficult, just because now, you know, if, I don't know, until 15 or 20 years ago, for an artist, well, you know, it was quite, I don't want to say difficult to, how can I say, to disrupt corporate media. But I mean, at the end of the day, it was, you had to, you know, you had to have some kind of technical skill that, you know, you couldn't just wake up one day and say, today I will start a pirate radio, for example, if you know what I mean. While now, with the fact that almost everyone has a sort of, you know, social media profile, I suppose it's just more difficult to have your voice heard, if you know what I mean. And I suppose it can be quite difficult to be heard in the midst of so many people screaming on social media. And of course, you know, you have to, I suppose you have to be able to, how can I say, to surf the algorithm, maybe. You have to learn the SEO strategies to, you know, to ensure that your message passes through. What do you think, Fabiola?
About the last question, or what?
Oh, in general, I mean, given the context of your works, do you think that artists can produce, let's say, disruptive, or let's say effective, you know, let's say critical artworks about social media and digital culture on the same platforms that they despise, let's say?
Yeah, I do think it's possible, and I love, for example, Paolo Sirio, his artwork, and one of his latest artworks with the influencers exposed, like making this advertising of bad products, like bad like influence, and they are influencers, and how does these things are unhealthy for the people that are watching this, or like looking at the social media of their favorite influencers, and how old are the people that these influencers are like following. And I think it's very brave of Paolo's work, because he's always like pushing the boundaries between like what you can say on social media and what you can't say. So I think is, well, I love the idea of being like exposed, and like how he works and how other people work with exposing social media defects on social media. Yeah, I love it.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Now, I would have a question for Aleksandra. Aleksandra, can you please explain what are the opportunities that only a digital gallery offers to artists and collectors? And maybe, you know, what is one piece of practical advice you would give to artists and collectors who may want to learn more about this scene?
Yeah, if you think about it, there are opportunities for both as a gallery and also as a participant. So the most straightforward would be the agility and the flexibility it offers us as a gallery to turn around exhibitions and events, and this way offer opportunities to a wider number of artists. We're not occupying a physical space. Although I do believe that the connection between physical and digital is important, and moving forward, when the crisis is over, we do hope to partner with physical institutions. But at the same time, right now, all our efforts and all our time can be invested into experimenting in the space, offering that flexibility to try new things and try to develop different kinds of exhibitions and really utilize the space as much as we can.
Mm-hmm.
And as part of our mission, it is to educate about digital art. So if someone does want to learn in the scene, you can join and follow us. And there's also tons and tons of organizations working in the field. To name a few, there's Ars Electronica, there's Art Domains, there's Kadaf,
Mm-hmm.
there's Basel, there are so many. And if you just take a few and follow the events and start following individual artists, and even like now the cohort of artists that we selected featuring Fabiola and 17 others, it's already a good starting point, because it can be overwhelming. And there are many platforms that have an overwhelming number of artists, and it's just good to take it slow and start learning one by one.
Brilliant. Right. So at this point, I will double check whether our public has any questions. So please type your questions now. This is probably the best time. Let's see.
I have a question from Mel. So why do we assume that effective equals disruptive? That seems to reproduce the way Silicon Valley thinks of things. Are there other ways we can think about what it means for art to be effective?
Absolutely. What do you think, Caroline?
That's such a great question. Thank you so much for asking that, Mel. Again, I feel like I'm going to sound like a broken record here by saying like there's many different kinds of levers we can press, but I mean, I think disruptive is just a small form. When I make art, I make art sort of under the guise of like usefulness. So with my art project Feminist Dataset, I'm using intersectional feminism as a framework for investigating every part of the machine learning pipeline. And inside of that art project, it means that I'm often having to like make an alternative tool to something you would use inside of machine learning. So I've made like a browser-based tool to do data labeling and data structuring. And part of that was out of my Mozilla Foundation fellowship of thinking through labor and AI, and also thinking through how AI artists like relate to like data labeling and data set structuring, and how startups are, you know, using services like Crowdflower, Mechanical Turk, and how do you define or think through like what are feminist constraints of labor? Like what is the feminist act of like training a data set or training a data model? What is the feminist act of like working with other people to assemble a data set? Like what principles or frameworks are needed? So for me, I try to build things through this sort of idea or lens of usefulness, again, while also recognizing when I put on my research hat that you know, that I may have the option to use an alternative, but that's not an option that everyone else has. And so that's often why I think it's important to like critique these bigger structures as opposed to just saying we just shouldn't use them at all. But as I think as an artist, I also think it's very interesting to say, like, what are these imaginaries then if we had new constraints, or, you know, if we aren't living in, for example, the dream of Mark Zuckerberg, like what is Fabiola's dream of what Instagram could be, you know, if she could remake it entirely, right, without any of the constraints that Instagram is, we would be living in a very different kind of dream, probably a much better and more equitable one, for example.
Oh, that's very interesting. We have another question from Nick. So this is for Fabiola. Fabiola, how do you promote your work? How do you promote your work? And does Electric Artefacts helps with it?
Well, how I promote my work, I always send my work to a bunch of open calls where I can maybe participate or be part of. And I don't know, well, with Alex, it was like a different kind of, how do you say, like, it was different how we started like to know each other and how we could collaborate together. But I don't know, I think my first platform to promote my work is on Instagram, yeah, and my Vimeo.
Yeah, I suppose that's very common among, you know, I suppose that even now, it really doesn't matter whether you are an artist interested in, let's say, digital art, or let's say, you know, traditional painting, or even, I don't know, sound art or glitch art, or even sculpture, I suppose. Something else I noticed in these years as teacher is that more often than not, you know, when you're young and when you want to share your art, the easiest way to do that is by starting, you know, an Instagram profile, or by sharing your works on Facebook and all of that. So yeah, it's always great to see how different people from different backgrounds do so. So yeah.
Yeah, actually, because we often work, so in my work at Art, we essentially work with artists for them to establish a digital presence, and naturally the .art domain is often something that they would pursue. And I think it's absolutely true that you want to tap into that social media audience. And I think that Caroline also mentioned that essentially, you know, we don't really own it. We are the curators of it, but we're working within a certain framework. And it's always good to have that hub where you centralize all your sort of traffic, where you can add your CV, so an actual piece of text instead of copy pasting, you know, in every caption. And I think by creating the pages for the artists that we have on Electric Artefacts, by adding the audio, by adding the images, we wanted to compensate in a way for having that centralized destination, but also have like an exercise if the artist was willing to, you know, continue doing it independently in the long term.
That's brilliant, thank you. I think we have a couple of minutes. Right, so we have another question from Nick for Alex. So how can artists engage with Electric Artefacts?
Well, all of you are engaging right now by joining our panel discussion. But on our homepage, we actually have an artist inquiry page where you can submit your profile if you want to, but we are doing an open call in the coming weeks for our next show, so stay tuned.
That's great. So I think that's all for today, unless you have one very last question. Let's see, I will give you 20 seconds.
Yeah, I'm going to quickly answer Bruce's question about why do we support iPhone. So for now,
Yes.
the tools to create the augmented reality experience were presented by Apple, so by iOS. So that's why, but it is hard to find a universal solution. So another alternative is Instagram. But then again, it's the reliance on someone else's platform rather than being able to share the file for people to try at home.
That's brilliant. I think that's all. That's all for today. So I would want to thank Fabiola, Caroline, and of course Aleksandra for the great discussion, and all of you for watching us from home. If you want to learn more about digital art and exhibitions, I suggest you to visit the website of Electric Artefacts and follow us on social media. Of course, if you have questions for some of us, I suppose you are very welcome to get in contact with us on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram. There are many ways to do so. If you have one last thing to say in 30 seconds, each of you feel welcome. Is there anything you want to say to our public? Like one last thing they can't, you know, one very last thing to finish the meeting, maybe.
Well, if you haven't already, I highly recommend checking out Fabiola's work at Electric Artefacts.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming to our talk.
Thanks, everyone.
That's great.
Thanks, everyone.
That's brilliant. So thank you, everyone. And of course, feel welcome to follow Electric Artefacts social media pages so you will know when the next event is coming up. Until then, thank you again and speak to you soon, I suppose.
Yes.
That's brilliant.